Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit. Luthra, multiple bilaterals, a Quad summit, a possible meeting with Donald Trump and an address to the Indian diaspora. Prime Minister Modi, who flies down to the US for a 3-day visit, has a packed schedule ahead of him. His first stop, Delaware, the venue of the Quad summit, which will be attended by President Biden and leaders of Japan and Australia. Modi will also be paying a visit to Biden's family residence in the state, regional stability in the Indo-Pacific, ongoing conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza, emerging critical technology, and a few of the issues that may be discussed at the Quad meeting. The group may also take stock of China's growing influence. Prime Minister Modi will also be engaging in bilateral talks with his Australian, Japanese, and US counterparts. From Delaware, the Prime Minister will fly down to New York. He's scheduled to address the General Assembly at the United Nations, and interaction with the Indian diaspora is also on the cards. That's not all. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump claimed last week that he will be meeting Modi and called him a fantastic man, even as he criticized India for abusing trade ties. However, there has been no official confirmation from the Ministry of External Affairs on any such meeting so far. Joining us right now to take this forward are Tanvi Madan, Senior Fellow at Brookings Institution, and Michael Kugelman, Director at the South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center. Thank you very much for joining us. Tanvi Madan, if I can begin with you, what's the big win that President Biden, this is going to be his last Quad meeting, in fact, possibly his last set of foreign engagements as well, a farewell Quad summit, so to say. What do you think will be the win that Joe Biden is looking out of this visit?
I think he is seeking to consolidate the achievements of his administration when it comes to both the India relationship, but also the Quad, which was restarted during the Trump administration. But you've really seen it progress pretty significantly during the Biden administration as part of a broader investment in minilateralism, as it's called here, or coalitions, or plurilaterals, as it's called in India. Here it's called the lattice work or the network of alliances and partnerships. So I think President Biden will want to consolidate that, but also set it up for the future of both the bilateral relationship as well as for the Quad to succeed in the future. So for him, if you look back at where what the concerns were, what the questions were during the transition period from Trump to Biden, there were questions in India about what a Biden administration would portend. The Biden administration has been pretty transformational, particularly in the defense, security, and technology sectors for the U.S.-India relationship, but also for the Quad. And I think he'll be seeking to highlight that while also set it up for the future.
Right. Michael Kugelman, when the Quad meets, do you get a sense that China, countering China, is going to be the big priority for all the 4 countries and also for Prime Minister Modi and President Biden in that bilateral meeting as well?
Right. Well, as you know, the Quad leaders and the Quad countries always like to depict the Quad as a positive thing, something that is meant to create opportunities, alternative options for the countries of the Indo-Pacific, particularly in terms of investment options or opportunities to access public goods, that type of thing. But we know that this is all very much about countering China, and that's what the Quad has always been about. It's been very unusual to hear leaders of the Quad countries explicitly refer to China in public remarks about the Quad. But my sense is that the perception, particularly in Washington, is that the increasingly provocative and aggressive activities of China and several other competitors of the U.S. in the Indo-Pacific region suggest that we might hear more from the Quad leaders about China in an explicit sense, in a public sense, compared to what has been the case in the past. But again, it's very notable that you have this ongoing theme of Quad countries wanting to emphasize how this entity is about providing, disseminating public goods, clean technologies, investments, public health assistance throughout the region in order to counter what China is doing. Only what China is doing tends not to be highlighted in the public remarks by Quad leaders.
Right. Tanvi, Madan, just to build on what Michael is saying, countering the larger threat from China. What has happened in the last few weeks? We've seen a security of supply agreement being signed between India and the US in the defense sector. There was a collaboration that was announced by the US State Department with the Indian government to explore investments and semiconductor manufacturing in India as part of the CHIPS Act in the United States. So how do you expect US and India to build on that ISET partnership, the technology partnership? Will this also be a priority for the US considering that they're heading into elections?
I think you're seeing a lot of movement across these various sectors where you're seeing at the working level things that have been negotiated, they're finally getting signed. Now, part of it is this is not the last big engagement there'll be before for the US and India. There will be a 2+2. There was just an intersessional, which is the working level meeting before the ministerial. So I think you will continue to see, in fact, this relationship chug along. And that's actually normal for a relationship as it matures, where, yes, the presidential, the prime ministerial level is important, but you're seeing continued movement across these various sectors. And hopefully will continue regardless of who wins the election. And in some ways, the fact that President Biden himself is not on the ballot actually gives the two sides more space to get some of these things done because the staff on this side, the working level staff on this side, actually can devote the time to, including the president's staff, can devote the time to actually locking up some of these achievements in these spaces. So I expect whether you see what you've seen in the last few years, you'll see them try to continue that momentum and get some of the deals, some of the agreements signed over the next few months. And as you said, they're not just these agreements. As we speak, over just the last week, you've seen every one of the Indian military services essentially exercise with the U.S. military, whether it's Yudhabhyas that's going on in India right now, whether it is India and the US and Australia and Japan exercising on the sidelines of the Kakadu exercise in Australia. And then, of course, the US Air Force participating in Tarang Shakti, which India hosted. So you've seen how much the relationship has changed. And I think they'll try to get a few more things done before the end of the year. Every president since Bill Clinton has said that they have left a US-India relationship better than they found it. And I think we'll see that that's the case in the Biden administration as well.
Right. Michael, here in the Foreign Office, when the Foreign Secretary was addressing the media, there was a lot of interest whether India is going to come up with some sort of peace proposal in the United States or whether Prime Minister will speak of a peace proposal during the summit of the future. Do you expect that to come up in the discussions with President Biden, maybe Kamala Harris, maybe Donald Trump as well?
You mean a peace proposal in the context of Ukraine? Is that what you're referring to?
Correct. Correct.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is significant that Prime Minister Modi has been in both Russia and Ukraine in recent weeks. That's something that not many other world leaders, if any, can say. And I would think that at the least during the Quad meeting, that Modi will be asked to talk about his visits, and perhaps there'll be some interest in hearing him out as to what he would hope to do to try to create conditions for peace or a peace negotiation. But I don't think we should overstate this idea. One could talk about how Prime Minister Modi might be well positioned to play the role of someone that could bring the sides to the table, so to speak, because of a special relationship with Russia and because of a good relationship with Ukraine. But I think this may be putting the cart before the horse in the sense that it doesn't seem like the belligerents are in the mood to sit down for talks and to try to end this war. But I do think that we can expect that Ukraine and the war in Ukraine will be discussed at the Quad summit, and that there'll be a lot of interest in just hearing from Modi as to what exactly he experienced in both Russia and Ukraine. But of course, as we all know, this war is one of the few things that the four Quad countries do not see eye to eye on, just because India has a very different position from the other three Quad countries. So I don't think that we should overstate what exactly could come out of this summit, this Quad summit, vis-a-vis the Russia-Ukraine issue, just because there is that disconnect. And I imagine that in the joint statement that comes out later after the summit, we might see some references to concerns about the humanitarian situation, wanting to provide humanitarian support. That's what we've seen in the past. I don't expect anything different this time around.
Right. Tanvi, what do you think when it comes to Summit of the Future, which will be the Prime Minister's last event and address in the United States? Do you expect Ukraine to figure prominently? And does the US feel that India can play a role as a mediator?
The Summit for the Future, the idea behind that is, I think the big case that India will make there is for, kind of more proportional representation in the multilateral domain, in the international order. This is a moment for India to highlight that, it's one of the largest countries in the world with the largest population in the world, with an economy that's its size and a military its size. That you do see, and a country that is now an aid donor, not an aid recipient, that it does not have a voice at the UN Security Council. So the Summit for the Future is partly, yes, about the future, about issues, like climate change, like other, but it is essentially, when the idea was, it was about reformed multilateralism. And I think part of the case that will be made implicitly or explicitly is that if the multilateral organization doesn't reform to accommodate not just India, but other voices, the concerns of the global South, and that includes thinking about, bring it back to your point about Russia-Ukraine, that the Russian invasion of the Ukraine and the war that followed has affected countries in different ways, including in the global South, and those voices need to be heard, and those concerns need to be factored in. And so I do think what you might hear is a reiteration, perhaps, of the Prime Minister's call that this is not an era of war. And keep in mind, there's not just the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the Israel-Gaza conflict continues as well. And I suspect you will find more people at the UN exercised with that right now than Russia-Ukraine, but just on Russia-Ukraine and kind of mediation. I think, in this era of instant gratification, we expect that there'll be a headline out of every kind of meeting, that will have instant results. Peacemaking, trying to get, conflict resolution or management or de-escalation is a painstaking process. India did this during the Korean War in the 50s. Takes a lot of back and forth. It's a lot of behind the scenes. It's a lot of meeting different parties. But as Michael said, you can prepare the ground for it, but both the belligerents and particularly in this case, you're going to see, you have a situation where President Putin doesn't even think that he should sit down with President Zelensky as Prime Minister Modi has called for him to do. So part of this is, it's a lot of back and forth. I wouldn't also underestimate the role that India is playing. The US has welcomed it, but at the same time said that, they want, the way that India and the US put it in joint statement, a just and durable peace, which means it's also not throwing Ukraine under the bus and just accepting Russian annexation of the territory that Ukraine has claimed and India has recognized as part of Ukrainian territory. So this is going to be painstaking. We're not going to hear a lot publicly, because the moment you go too public, that discretion is very important in these processes, in these negotiations. So I think it's good that India is trying. But I also think as a public, we should accept that we're not going to hear the TikTok of this on every day. We'll hear about it when the sides are ready to talk about it.
Right. Of course, the media is always impatient, isn't it, Tanvi? And these are things which take a long time in geopolitics. Michael, let me put that final question to you. And this would be regarding the possible meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Donald Trump, and Prime Minister's meeting with Kamala Harris. The Ministry of External Affairs has neither confirmed nor denied these meetings, but one is given to understand that if he meets Donald Trump, he will meet Kamala Harris. If he meets Kamala Harris, he meets Donald Trump. What will be the importance, the significance of these meetings, according to you?
I figured this question would come up at some point. I think that there are some risks for Prime Minister Modi if he actually were to meet with Trump. Now, who knows if this meeting is even planned? But if he were to meet with Trump but not meet with Harris, that would certainly generate a number of perceptions that he is favoring one candidate over the other. And I don't think that he or his government would want those perceptions to be out there. But it would be very significant. It would be very unusual, for sure, for a foreign leader to meet with two top presidential candidates, particularly less than 2 months before the election. It would certainly be a questionable thing to do. It would be a risky thing to do. But all I would say on this is we really don't know what's going on, what's going to happen. Certainly, there could be opportunities for there to be a meeting, given that Trump always has good reason to be in New York, and Modi will, of course, be in New York during this very short trip to the U.S. So there would be opportunities to set up a brief meeting. But again, it would be very unusual. It would be, I think, in terms of how it's perceived by many, there are a lot of risks there if Modi were to only meet with Trump and not with Harris. But let's see how things play out. The whole thing is a bit unusual, and I think that one has to take with some grains of salt Trump's original comment that he will be meeting with Modi this coming week. But let's see. It would certainly make for some interesting theater, among other things.
Right. Donald Trump has also said that India is the biggest abuser of trade relations, so we can't forget that as well. But Tanvi, Madan, Michael Kugelman, always a pleasure to have you here on CNBC-TV18 and Global Eye. And this is a story that we'll continue tracking all weekend. Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States and the bilateral agenda on the table. We're heading into a break at this point, but coming up, Gerard Mestralit, French President's envoy for the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, arrived in India for an effort to take forward the project. A special conversation with him on the other side.